Hello, so this video is a look into Black culture itself. So, thanks for watching.
With Black Lives Matter protests happening across America, this homemade edition of Showcase looks at the contributions made by Black artists. American history is built on the African slave trade, and that also means that millions of Black people had a massive impact on American pop culture, especially music. Here's a look at why.
Blues, jazz, rock and roll, hip-hop. American music was largely shaped by the resilience and resistance African slaves showed under oppression. After most of them adopted Christianity, Sundays were considered a day of rest and a time for slaves to practice worship on most plantations in the American South. This meant they were allowed to play music, sing hymns, and commune. In places like Congo Square in New Orleans, Africans used this allowance to play the drums. The rhythms and songs they learned from each other would go on to lay the foundations of modern gospel music and influence other musical genres such as blues, jazz, and swing. Blues shows the transition from African slave to African American citizenry. In other words, the struggles faced within the aftermath of slavery.
You got a boy child coming, gonna be a son of a gun.
As for jazz, it developed from roots in blues and ragtime, and today is seen by many as America's classical music. Jazz and blues, along with many other musical styles, also influenced rock and roll, a genre known for merging African musical tradition with European instrumentation.
Riding along in my automobile. That's why I go for that rock and roll music.
And I'm here, and I'm there. I'm Big Bang Hank, I'm everywhere.
But the latest derivative of slave songs is hip-hop, which was formed in New York City in the 1970s.
Don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge.
It became a voice for the youth of marginalized backgrounds and mirrored the social, economic, and political realities of their lives.
Going under.
I can see the evil, I can tell it, I know it's illegal.
Today, artists such as Kendrick Lamar,
Partner, put the candy penning on the Rico, digging in my pocket, and a profit big enough to feed you.
I wish the hating would stop. War,
Common,
matter with us. I know that Black lives matter and they matter to us.
and Childish Gambino release songs that feature elements of jazz, funk, and gospel, while they speak directly about the conditions of African Americans, just like blues did.
This is America.
Slavery inspired all of these musical genres, and even more of them, one way or another. It seems fair to say the influence of the cruel and dehumanizing practice has left a lasting legacy on music that's ever evolving.
But there's two sides to every story, and now you know mine.
So, we begin the program with Charles Burchell. He is a multi-instrumentalist, composer and producer, originally from New Orleans. Hi, good to see you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Okay, Charles, so let's just dive deep into the Black contribution to American music together. Let me just ask you right away, can I say that modern American music is completely shaped by early slave music?
Yes, I would definitely say that pretty much all American music has some derivative from African American culture. Definitely tracing back to slavery, but I would say that the biggest contributions happened after slavery and once Black people started to integrate into modern American culture and were able to learn instruments, namely the guitar and other brass instruments. Once we actually had the tools to create music, we were able to then develop many different musical styles.
I mean, of course, ragtime, blues, jazz, hip hop, rap, obviously I understand why they would be Black or they get their inspiration from Black culture. But for example, rock music, it's widely seen as a white music,
Right.
I guess. So
Well, that
is it the case?
Yeah, well, so that's kind of one of the things that a lot of times people don't understand because of history. So with black culture and black music in particular, black people were still segregated into the 60s. So there was a lot of music that we created that to sell records needed a different face, needed a white face. So rock and roll in particular is one of those styles of music. Rock and roll definitely was a black creation. It's a derivative of rhythm and blues. And you have Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, who were some of the pioneers of this Fats Domino, people who were from the South of the United States, the American South. These are the pioneers of rock and roll music. However, rock and roll didn't blow up until Elvis Presley and other people like that became the face of it. And then when you had the British invasion and people coming from Britain playing their own brand of rock, that's when I think it really solidified as something that was white. But the origins of it, and anybody, especially the British rockers will tell you, the origins are definitely from the black community. Rock and roll is a derivative of the blues, a derivative of R&B, and it's just the fact that in American culture, the mainstream America wasn't ready to accept black faces as these superstars. They would only just allow a few. So rock and roll was one of the first things that had to be kind of appropriated and re-assimilated to the culture, redisseminated to the culture. But it's definitely a black creation.
Okay, this is not really widely recognized, I guess. I really want to go back to the roots of black music in the US. I mean, slavery music, and then, the role of music during the civil rights movement, etc. But before we do that, hearing what you said about rock music, do you think that black contribution to music in the US is widely recognized or recognized enough?
I think in some circles, definitely. I think I will say that Black American music is America's biggest export. It's something that you find all over the world. I did work in 2015 as a cultural diplomat for the United States State Department, and our group, it was a program called Next Level, and we went around to different countries teaching hip hop workshops. And it was amazing to find that in all these different countries, there was a hip hop community. And this program started really in the 30s, or no, in the 40s with the Jazz Ambassadors program with Louis Armstrong. So even during other administrations and other times, Black American music has always been used as this cultural tool to basically spread peace around the world or say, okay, American culture is okay. And so I would definitely say that there's an appreciation, maybe even a greater appreciation for Black American music outside of the United States. Not that it's not appreciated in the United States, but we're often sampled, but we're not cited. We're not given the proper credit.
Okay, Charles, I mean, we don't have much time today, so I'm just going to ask you about the role of music in terms of identity and the feelings of solidarity for Black communities during slavery and after slavery until the Black Lives Matter movement. What do you think is the importance of music for the Black community?
Well, music was one of the ways that we were able to keep our African cultures and customs. Starting from slavery, we only had one day a week where we could semi-rest, and that was because they would allow us to go to church. So in these church services, in certain places like New Orleans, the African slaves were able to still play their drums, so they were still able to keep their rhythms. And then it morphed through the hymnals, through the European hymnals. So you get spirituals and you get gospel, and then all this morphed once the slaves were freed into the blues, and then that morphed to R&B and rock and roll and ragtime and jazz. But in every time period in which a new genre is born, it's always a reaction to social conditions, whether that's slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, civil rights music, the protests of Vietnam, the destruction of the urban communities in the 70s and 80s, which birthed hip hop and house and techno and all these things. Black music has always been a source of joy, but it's also been a source of resistance between whatever was going on, between an oppressive society. And so I think that's one of the things that a lot of people, and I hope, would understand during this time of social unrest, is that Black people and Black Americans have given so much to the world, and we just want to be seen as human. You know, we want to be seen and valued just like anybody else.
So let's just talk about the role of music for the Black Lives Matter movement, really.
Okay, so I definitely think that, especially in 2015, when Kendrick Lamar came out with "To Pimp a Butterfly," his song "All Right" became the theme of the Black Lives Matter movement and these protests. And the song basically says that we're going to be all right, which to me illustrates how Black music has always been used as a tool to heal and to bring joy, but also resistance. Because at that time, as now, we're always facing police brutality and all these unfair practices of discrimination in the workplace. And so much of that song and the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, is about knowing that we're going to be okay through this, but also wanting to recognize and wanting everyone else to recognize our shared humanity and that, all of us do matter, but we need to focus on the fact that Black people are being killed disproportionately by the police, being discriminated disproportionately, and we need people to hear us and understand that our voices matter, our music matters, our culture matters, and that it should be appreciated.
Yeah, there are really strong songs coming out. I mean, after the Black Lives Matter movement a few years ago. I mean, I remember "This Is America," for example.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Of
"Formation."
course.
What other songs can you mention?
Definitely, I would say, especially now, I think "This Is America" is very timely because the protests that you see right now in America, especially with a lot of the destruction of police vehicles and these kind of riots that I think are being painted in one way when there's also a lot of dance and celebration and peaceful protest. It's kind of the juxtaposition of what America is, where, especially with Black people, we've always been met with the culture of violence, and somehow we've made music and somehow we've made dances and we've resisted creatively, So to me, that is the song that resonates, I think, the most with this moment right now. And I mean, there's so many different artists making music that speaks to this time: The Roots, Black Thought, J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, so many different people, Erykah Badu, all these different artists are making music. Also in the jazz world, Christian Scott, Nicholas Payton.
Yeah.
So many people are speaking to the condition of Black Americans and our music and why our contribution to music matters and has been overlooked because, historically it's always been appropriated by mainstream American culture and changed to be this is American, without actually recognizing the source of it, because it's easy to take the culture but not care about the people. So we're just, with this Black Lives Matter movement and with all the social movements throughout the 20th century and before, we're just asking to be seen and treated as human beings that we are, and all of us are human beings. So it's time for us to remember that and share that.
Yes. Okay, Charles Burchell, you gave us a lot to think about today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
A result of racism in America is a lack of representation for Black people in pop culture. And nowhere is that clearer than at the movies. While today people are protesting in the streets, directors have been fighting for some time at the box office.
What I tell you about that noise? What I tell you about them pictures?
It was Spike Lee's 1989 film Do the Right Thing that paved the way for Black directors to get considerable attention in Hollywood. The comedy drama that focuses on racial tension and police overreaction is considered as one of the most important films of the era.
Deep down inside, I think we wish you were Black.
Who told you to step on my sneakers? Who told you to walk on my side of the block? Who told you to be in my neighborhood?
And then many other hits came along. Reginald Hudlin's House Party was one of them.
What you got to say now, punk?
Something wrong? Something wrong, yeah.
Boys in the Hood was another cult classic, which made its director John Singleton the first African-American and the youngest ever Best Director Oscar nominee. But as fast as Hollywood embraced this wave of talent, it also ignored it. It turned out the overwhelmingly white industry's interest in empowering minority artists wasn't for the right reasons, it was just a trend. A recently published interview in the New York Times reveals some of the hardships African-American filmmakers faced back then. Juice director Ernest Dickerson told the newspaper, "There used to be a time where you went after an agency and they would always tell the story, we already got our Black filmmakers." Things weren't so different for Darnell Martin, who directed the 1994 romantic comedy I Like It Like That. You had to do what they wanted you to do too, because you were their Black filmmaker. But in the past few years, Black films have made a huge comeback. That's thanks to Barry Jenkins and his 2016 coming-of-age drama Moonlight, the first film with an all-black cast that won the Oscar for Best Picture.
At some point, you gotta decide for yourself who you're gonna be. Can't let nobody make that decision for you.
Do they know I'm black?
Should they?
Ever since, a string of hit movies such as Jordan Peele's Get Out and the superhero blockbuster Black Panther have inspired optimism that Hollywood could change in favor of minority artists. But the question is, how long will this second boom of black films last?
The revolution will be live.
So, let's talk movies with Mia Mask, a professor of film at Vassar College, where, among other things, she teaches African American cinema. Hi Mia, good to see you, thank you.
Hi, good to be here.
So, let's just start with 2018, where everyone was talking about a rise in black cinema. Obviously, we've seen 16 black directors, for example, working on top 100 films, or we've seen a huge movie like the Black Panther. But then, do you think has real change happened?
That's a great question. Thank you. I am skeptical to say that real change has come from these movies. It was wonderful to see so many Black directed or African American directed films released in 2018. When we think about the list, it includes wonderful films like Black Klansman by Spike Lee, or Ryan Coogler's Black Panther. We might even point out films that came a couple years before, like Barry Jenkins' Moonlight, released in 2016. And so there were a range of films, even Boots Riley's Sorry to Bother You, also a 2018 release. These were wonderful films, critical, important in terms of questions of social justice, but they could only go so far. We need to see changes happening in the political realm as well. So it's great to see more African American filmmakers getting opportunity to make these pictures, but we need to see more substantive change in other realms of society.
Definitely, but then if you just keep it to the cinema industry, how do you feel about the situation there? Do you think it's fair for black filmmakers? I mean, looking at Oscars So White, movement, for example.
Yeah, it's been very refreshing to see a more politicized movement taking root through Oscar So White, and that raising awareness, raising some consciousness among filmmakers and film producers to make people more likely to want to sponsor and greenlight films by Black directors, by women of color, Black women directors in particular. So we are seeing some movement, but it will take some time before we'll know if that is long-term and substantive change.
Yeah, and we still don't have enough non-genre Black films, do we?
Absolutely. It's important to see additional content, right? So it's really early days before we can make a determination to say, yes, real institutional change has occurred. It's not just the action picture or the crime serial or the crime drama, but we have Black dramas, Black family pictures, and as you say, non-genre pictures.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's just talk about the portrayal of Black people in cinema. I mean, unfortunately, we don't have the time to dive deep into the history, but then today, for example, where we're seeing a lot more Black movies, do you think the representation is fair? Take Green Book, for example, an important movie in this sense.
Yes, Green Book was a troubling film in some ways, because one of the things that Green Book does is it's akin to a film like The Help, which does not adequately take up the social context of the civil rights era and the movements occurring at the time, and instead the friendship or the relationship is sort of one that is negotiated through a service relationship, where the Black or white member of one person in the friendship is in a service capacity, and that places some structural limitations on the narrative and on what can be done and what can be said and what can happen. And unfortunately, I thought that Green Book, while entertaining for some, really was disappointing in terms of its representation of Black characters and African American and American issues.
Okay, so I mean, before I let you go, looking at the situation in the movie industry at the moment, and hearing what you said about Green Book, how can people interested in Black cinema seek out new Black filmmakers? Do you have any recommendations for us?
Absolutely. If you haven't seen Queen and Slim, a 2019 release by a young woman filmmaker, I encourage you to see Melina Matsoukas' film. It's wonderful, as well as some of the other films that I've mentioned. Boots Riley, Sorry to Bother You, a 2018 release. So there are a number of wonderful films out there. They're not hard to find, and right now people are posting them, blogging about them. Lists are coming out. There are also wonderful films from the 70s and 80s to watch. The documentary about Malcolm X in his own words by Arnold Pearl, that's a 1972 film. And to just go back and see other Spike Lee films, Ava DuVernay's movies. There are a lot of great films out there. I encourage people to see Ava DuVernay's The 13th, which is an excellent documentary. So there's a lot of wonderful content.
How lovely, so many recommendations. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So, finally on today's show, let's take a deep dive into Black literature in the United States with Rochelle Smith-Spears, an associate professor at Jackson State University. Hello, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, is it possible to say that in African American literature, confronting racism and injustice has been the main goal, main theme running?
I believe historically, yes, it has been a very significant part of the literature. You think about the slave narratives that were written in the 1800s, 1800s. Yes, certainly that has been a part of it and throughout the history. But today, while that has been a significant part of the literature, it hasn't been the only part of it. You can look at, for instance, with contemporary lit, you can look at, for instance, Angie Thomas's The Hate U Give, which was recently published, and they made a film into it. Yeah, so that story is largely about confronting, racism, police brutality, microaggressions that people face on a daily basis. But, but it's also about family and community and, learning about identity. So those are some other aspects of the literature as well.
Okay, it's so good to hear that because I read sometimes that there's not really room for diversity of stories that don't necessarily align with race issues for Black writers. How much of this is the case, you think?
I think that there is definitely room for diversity. That like I said, this is not while racism and oppression and that has been a very significant part of African American literature and the African American experience. I mean, certainly, we live, we breathe, we go to the grocery store, we go to school. So these are also parts of it. I mean, one of the things that I am really excited about is literature that feature, vampires. And so, that's really diverse, right? And so, there is room for diversity in African American literature.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what do you think about literary prizes, for example? Do you think that, there has been some concerns about racial disparity. Do you think Black writers are treated the same way as white writers?
Probably, I would have to say no. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about Black writers not being given the same kinds of attention and validation through prizes and just recognition. So no, I do not think that Black writers are given that same attention.
I think Bernardine Evaristo, for example, was it last year when when she got the Booker Prize, it was sort of a joint thing with Margaret Atwood, and that really received a lot of criticism. So Bernardine Evaristo is definitely one name, one contemporary name that is popular. Why don't we talk about some of the recent popular Black American literature?
So you're asking an English professor to talk about books. We could be here all day. But one of the ones that I have been really excited about is it's a young adult novel, but it's Tomi Adeyemi's Children of Blood and Bone. That has been that I think that is a really exciting book. And I'm not the biggest reader of young adult literature, so that has really been a very big surprise for me that I have enjoyed this book so much. But it's actually a part of a trilogy.
Thank you so much for all these. Unfortunately, we don't have much time today, but it was good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this homemade edition of Showcase. We have so much more on our YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter accounts. I'm Elif Bereketli. Bye-bye.
Hello, so I hope you enjoyed this video. So leave a comment, like, subscribe if you enjoyed it. If not, give me, some reasons why you didn't enjoy it or topics, your own opinion on the topic, whatever. Anyway, thanks for watching.